Welcome, everyone, to a special edition of the Juggalo Rewind podcast. We are interrupting your regularly scheduled program for a special interview. Oh, yes, we do interviews. This week, before we get too deep into Season 4, One Less G in the Hood, we wanted to take a step back and talk to the man behind some of your favorite music of this era. We are talking to none other than producer extraordinaire Fritz The Cat. You're going to hear lots of stories about not just the Blaze CD that we're talking about in Season 4, but also a little bit of Most Tasteless from Season 1, a little Dark Lotus from Season 2, and who knows where else the conversation will stray. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Chris and I talking to Fritz the Cat.
Yo, Fritz, put on a motherfucking beat that we can shake our motherfucking rolls to.
All right, everyone, welcome back. We are here with a very special guest. Please welcome our good friend, Fritz the Cat. Fritz, what's going on?
Hey, man. What's happening, guys?
Oh, not a whole lot. We're glad to finally get in touch with you.
Yeah.
We have lots to discuss. You've been a popular topic of discussion over our last couple seasons.
Yeah, you've weaved in and out of the story of a couple of the albums we discussed, so it's nice to get you on record here to discuss it a little bit.
It's always nice to be on record because there's a lot of, there's a lot of shit out there. So, it's good to go right to the source if you want information.
Agreed. We don't want to turn this into a, history of you. We want to kind of keep it topical to what we've talked about in the past on our podcast. But there's a couple things we need to start with. I've done a little research. I do some research every once in a while.
Investigative journalism?
Yes. Are you a native Michigander?
I am a native Michigander. I grew up in Marquette, Michigan, up in the UP.
UP, for those, you're recording, right, Chris?
Yeah.
So for everyone watching over there, that is over yonder. Yonder, right? Before you get to the Keweenaw.
Yes. Yep.
So Uper, that's good.
Yeah.
My family, or my wife's family is all Uper born, Uper bred, so I'm familiar with the area.
So you're a Green Bay fan then, right? Because everyone in the UP is?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's everybody up there is a Green Bay fan. I really wasn't. I was more into like the college hockey, like the Michigan Tech Huskies and NMU. So
nice
that rather than football, because it was like, because Green Bay sucked back then. So
they still do.
Well, yeah, but
for other
reasons.
Will,
so.
So you grew up in Marquette, up in the UP. Yeah. You came down to Delta College, correct?
Delta College, that is correct.
So you're making your way down the state here.
Yep, in beautiful University Center, Michigan, in between Midland, Bay City, and Saginaw.
Yeah, I think
electronics.
I looked it up and I'm like, where is this? I had no clue.
It's in the middle of a cornfield. So I went there for 2 years. I didn't get a degree or anything, but I went for electronics, but I ended up taking a physics class there that was called The Science of Musical Sound. And that was like, this electronic shit's got to go, man. I got recordings where it's at. It was all about how musical sound works and synthesis and recording and all that cool shit. So
that's cool. That's good to know. There's like a fundamental, there's a science behind it. It's not just turning on the microphones like we do. Like you're a professional.
Well, yeah, I'd hope at this point. I kind of consider myself a professional, but
And through the years, you were in many bands, correct? And different types of bands, which I found interesting.
Well, it's not in a ton of different bands, but I've been in some interesting stuff. As a matter of fact, one of the things I was doing today is the guy who played guitar in my high school band he's got a band. He tours. not necessarily just locally, but he'll do Ohio, and he doesn't do it full time. It's kind of like a hobby for him, an expensive hobby. But he's doing a solo album, so I was doing some bass lines for him, and that's a guy that I've known since 1985. So we still, keep together, and we're all still in music. So
nice.
I
ask, and there's no way. We talked about it last week.
Yeah.
My father-in-law was in a punk band in the middle of the state in that time frame, and I always wondered if you two somehow crossed paths. The Latin Dogs was his band.
The Latin Dogs. Well, I was living in Midland. I moved down there in '87 and lived there until I think mid 1989, and I was in a hardcore punk band called Morbid Fear, and they were all those dudes were in high school, so they were all like super young. So we didn't do a whole lot, but we did, we recorded some stuff, but I'd shoot over to Mount Pleasant. There was a bar called Tom's Foolery that had all the cool
Great name.
punk bands. So I don't know. There's a possibility I might have seen him if he ever played at Tom's Foolery.
I'll have to do a little research.
I saw a lot of shit go down there. So
if you're ever at an Astronomicon, he always comes and visits us there. So he'll talk your ear off about music if he gets the chance. So
awesome.
I'll give you the heads up if you have an hour to kill. So we don't want to go too far back in the past, but that's a good
lay the groundwork.
Yeah, because you're a musician's musician at this point. You're not just someone who, as we're about to talk about, worked at the disc. You've been in bands. You have a musical background. But eventually you did make your way to the disc, which we've talked about a great number of times.
Interesting transition, though, because you're coming from punk, hardcore, and the disc. At least it seems the time. I worked for, let's see here, 3 years maybe. My first professional recording gig was doing like commercials. We didn't do hardly any music at all, but doing like recording voiceovers and professional speakers and like production type of stuff, but not really a whole lot of music. But then after hours, I'd record my band, or I worked on a soundtrack for a film when I was working there. But then after that is when I went over to the disc. But the disc is where the Recording Institute of Detroit is where I went in 1989 to recording school. So it's one of the guys that I knew was working for the school over there. He's like, well, shit, give Greg a call. And I went in and he's like, okay, yeah, fine. So.
And obviously the disc, at least from a hip hop side of things in Detroit, I mean, who's who went through there, and not just hip hop. I mean, you've talked about Anita Baker recorded there. George Clinton's been there, but
MC5 recorded there in the late '60s. Because it used to be a place called GM Studios, not affiliated with the automaker, but it was. They did a lot of the soul stuff. So same type of thing as like Motown was doing, because there were a lot of places that were recording that type of music at the time in the mid 60s and stuff. But then Greg, who ran the disc, he used to work for Holland Dozier Holland, who were the songwriters for Motown. They wrote a lot of like the big Motown hits. They had their own studio and he worked for them. The guy who ran the school actually worked for Motown. So there was like a big Motown connection there, and I think that's what brought George Clinton and his people there. He's like, okay, well, I know these people through his connections with, doo-wop and the soul people. So, yeah, and then once with the George Clinton thing, that's when when the G-Funk stuff and the West Coast stuff took off. People are like, well, that's where George Clinton recorded, so all the gangster rappers wanted to come.
So that's kind of how it transitioned to more of a rap mecca, at least in that time frame.
He was more than happy to take their money. So, So it was, when I first started there, I worked 7 at night till 7 in the morning, 6 days a week. I had Wednesday nights off, and it was just nonstop, 12 hours a day, just chaos. But I mean, I met a lot of great people. And here's some crazy things that have happened. So I recorded a lot of like local people, like Mount Clemens people and Detroit people, like 95, 96, having a lot of people roll through there that just never, their shit never popped. They didn't have anybody to promote it. They just put it out locally and, that was it. But, you do what you can do to make it a cool project. Well, right when COVID started, this guy got a hold of me and he's like, do you happen to have a cassette copy of Daddy Ham Hoggin Thang?
What a name.
And I'm like, I do. He's like, I'll give you $100 for it. And I'm like, okay, well, it's sitting in a shoebox. And, I played bass on it. I engineered it. So then he started talking and then he was like, he's part of this collectors group that they just collect like just cassettes and just 90s stuff.
Okay.
So, and he knew all this shit that I worked on that maybe there were like a couple hundred copies made of this stuff, but he knew all of it. And it's
where's
like,
he digging that up?
do you have, well, okay. So I sold him some stuff and then come to find out when I go to ship it to him, I can't just ship it to him because he's in Russia. So you have to send it to a place in like Delaware and then they freight forward it once they have enough stuff to ship over to Russia. So that, blows my mind. Then earlier on last year, I had a guy who's like, what do you know about this cassette? Just sends me a Facebook message. And it's the only place he could get it is for the Russian guy. It's a guy went by the name of Lalo. And again, he did one project. That's all he ever did. Made a couple hundred copies. It was all in consignment and probably most of the cassettes got thrown out. Well, he's like, what do you know about this? He got my name off the credits and then looked me up on social media. And I'm like, I know where you had to get that. Come to find out, he's in the Netherlands, but he traded for it from some guy in France. So it went from Russia to France to now it's in the Netherlands. And this guy's the same way. Is he just knows all of these, obscure acts and they're all looking for the most obscure shit they can find. And just to have people appreciate that, back when we were doing it, we'd put our all into it, but they couldn't promote it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't selling. To all of a sudden, it's like you got people that have an appreciation for what we were doing freaking 30 years later. That's cool shit right there. So, that's good disc stuff right there.
Definitely.
Yeah, even just talking about the names of people who went through there that didn't make it, like that's super interesting. And
right. You didn't have, the internet to upload anything you wanted. Like you had to put a lot of time, energy, money back then. So there's probably a ton of hidden gems these guys are hunting down that kind of got lost in the shuffle,
Yeah, and again, it was like the ones that got a push are usually the ones that had like drug money behind them,
right?
And there was one act called the A-Team that put out a project, and they actually had like a record label that they started and trademarked the name, and then like about a year later, some woman from California like called the studio and was like, I need contact information for these guys because they had one song. It was pretty dope, but she was like, wanted to know, how do I get a hold of these guys? We want to put this album out. And it was, swear to God, nothing. Radio silence, all the contact information we had is nothing. And it's still
just gone.
Who knows? They're just gone. Their guys are just unreachable.
It's like
I was
dust
like,
in
okay,
the
well,
wind.
you had a record deal waiting for you, but you're, I don't know, prison, dead. Who knows? So,
who else did we find? Like before we started digging into Twisted and all them, like the only one that I wrote down was your name is in the credits for Hush for Roses and Razorblades,
which is an all-time favorite of ours.
I the first time I worked with Hush was for on a Champtown EP.
Okay,
and he did production for Champtown, and that was like the first mastering credits I had, and that was like 96. And again, last year, Hush just did a project with this guy Bobby J from Rockaway out in New York. Just did an album and had me master it because he got my contact information again from Trick because I did some stuff for Trick too.
Oh,
so
nice.
Yes.
Yeah, another favorite of ours.
So Hush, as a matter of fact, Hush is performing February 25th at the Old Miami in Detroit.
Oh, really?
Geez. Old Miami's a nice little bar.
So, I mean, again, it was like I've been working with him for forever too. So, there were a lot of cool cats through there. There was some serious pieces of shit too, but there were a lot of cool people. So, and I'm just glad that some of them are still, alive and kicking and doing it.
So, I mean, that brings up a question I kind of wanted to ask further down the line, but I think the Hush thing kind of brings it up right now. I see, and I'm a novice, like I like music, but I don't know the ins and outs of it. I see someone like your name on a CD, and I don't know the difference between producing, mixing, mastering, like engineering. I don't know if people think those are interchangeable, but in the topic of Roses and Razorblades, that came out in 2002, maybe?
Yeah, 1 or 2.
That CD sounded so much better than everything else that was coming out at that time. Yeah. No disrespect to like Paradigm or any of the guys who were putting out CDs then that were big, but
that was crisp. Yeah,
you put Hush's CD in and it sounded like A+ professional, awesome sound. Like, can you explain the differences between all of the credits and like maybe that one in particular? Like, do you remember what you did to make that sound pop like it did? Because it's crazy how professional it was compared to his CD before that.
Right, like you said, everyone else who was on the same level in like local hip hop at the time with him.
Well, he did. For that one, he might have been. See, because our main guy Scott Sumner left because he was asking for more money, and the guy who ran the disc was just like, no, once you top out at like the top per hour pay, that's it. If you want to work more hours, you can make more money. And it's like, okay, well, how can 14 hours a day should we work? So it's like,
you're talking my language at work now.
So, and Scott was like the guy that all the big people would go there to work with him. So Scott's like, okay, Scott opened up a studio like 5 miles down the street and took like a big hunk of the clientele just because Greg didn't want to pay him more. Mm-hmm. So it was like, I don't know if that's quite the move, but so he might have been. I know that it was that we'd record Hush. I don't know if I mixed that one or if Scott mixed that one, because he did a lot of stuff with Scott after Scott opened up his studio. So I'd have to look at the.
Yeah, I feel like Roses and Razorblades had just your name on it, right?
Yeah, that's all. I didn't see Sumner's name listed because we were digging through it, but both those yours name and his always pop up in our digging around.
Yeah, because I think you may have had credits on 150 MCs, and then I don't know about Hush's first CD, but then Roses and Razorblades was the second one that was like blew him up around here. So I don't know. I see how they're interchangeable, and I'm not trying to make you dig in the archives of your brain from 20 years ago.
It's basically the engineer. Just a brass tacks. The engineer's the guy who hits a record button, and the producer's usually, traditionally what the producer is the guy who gets like the sound together. It tells the band, okay, these are the hot songs, here, try this again. That sucked, do it again. He'll do that type of thing. Sometimes they might be the person who wrote the songs but now, like, especially with modern hip hop, the producer is generally the person who makes the beat. Mm-hmm. But traditionally, the producer's been the person who actually, is in the studio kind of directing traffic. So it's kind of the lines get blurred there. Mm-hmm. So, you engineer the session, record everything, and then you go to mix it. You take all the elements and then mush them together. and then you have the song, and then the mastering engineer puts everything in order and gives everything kind of the final spit shine, and sequences the album. And so that's kind of the traditional way that it's done. But nowadays it's like, I don't know, you got people doing it on laptops in a bedroom, so I don't know what you can call yourself whatever. So
I just always see them interchangeable, and I always want to make sure, when someone says, "Oh, Fritz is a great producer," that I want to make sure are you producing the beat? Are you just hitting? I don't want to just say you're just hitting record, but I don't want to demean that.
It's because for like with Twisted, a majority of what I do for them now is I engineer their sessions where I cut all their vocals, but like some of the stuff will be my actual production, my music, and then some of it's other people's music. Some of the stuff I'll mix, some of the stuff will ship over to Straight Jacket to mix, or Young Wicked.
Yeah, they have a good team of diverse people.
But like for the rock stuff, I'll record all the vocals for that, but then it's in the rock world, you have to have the rock like people mix it and be hands-on with it, because they're looking for a particular sound. And I mean, I've been recording rap for 30 years, so that's like second nature to me, but it's like the whole rock world is a different thing, and you got to use the right people. It's like country, where it's like really, I don't know, I wouldn't say like political, but you've got to use the right people, or else there'll be like,
it's funny that
they ran into that where they had some rock stuff mixed by Joe Strange that he did like a rap mix on them, and like the rock radio was like, no, it's not right. So that's when they got into using Johnny Andrews, and then now they've been using doing a project with Zeus, so Rob Zombie's guy. So
that is interesting, because it has sounded like it progressively became more of rock than, like you said, a rap album with rock elements. As each layer as they went along.
And I mean, we were doing rock back with Freak Show.
Right.
We were tinkering with that, and then Man's Mutant, a lot of that was just straight rock stuff. So I mean, we were doing that, but now they're trying to do push the rock thing, because I mean, that's just another thing that they can do. So why wouldn't you do that? If you can do it, why not?
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, I always like the rock sound in the hip hop, so I'm all for it. No, there's no stopping me from enjoying that. So no, I think that's all good.
Yeah,
good stuff. Do you want to start jumping into?
Yeah, we could round back, as you mentioned Sumner. That was kind of our first question, almost, is trying to get to the bottom of what Sumner was involved in when it came to Most Tasteless. If you knew anything about him at that time. You said he's kind of the head of the disc.
He was, because he worked with them with House of Crazies. I think that they did most of House of Crazy stuff with the ROC, and that's how I knew them from. They would come in, and Brian would have his 8-track cassette recorder with them, because they'd use that, and then they dump their stuff down to our mastering guy. And but I think that it was for their like a pre-Twisted project or something, but they were working with Sumner, and they did some stuff with him, and I think that that's probably the stuff that they sent over to Joe, and then that's when Joe was like, okay, well, we got to get Mike on this, because I think that'd be a good fit.
That's pretty much what we've come to agree and believe with. They had stuff going. They, for lack of a better word, took it away from ROC, and formed Twisted, but they had that in their back pocket from Sumner.
It's kind of hard to figure out how much they brought to the table, how much Sumner, production wise, it kind of seems like jumbled there.
I think just listening to it, knowing how they work, and I think it was kind of an equal thing where he's got his talent that he brings to it, but then like Paul does a lot of production, and Jamie brings like, you know, he's the one who'll bring in a cassette with like, he'll just like record shit off of VHS and just have some weird shit. And like, here, can you loop this?
Yeah, there's plenty of that in that old stuff.
But that's I mean, that's how a lot of that stuff, you know, ends up cool like that.
Right.
Where you take stuff and do that. So it was, I'm sure that was like a you know, with them and Sumner working together on it. Cause I think he gets production credit on that.
He does. Yeah. He has a lot of it. ROC has it on Murder, Murder, Murder. Yeah. Because I think that was the deal that he straight up made that beat for them.
Yeah.
But the rest of it, if not all, has got Sumner's name all over that.
Yeah, it's original 90% CD. For sure.
We also bring that up because we tried to get in contact with Scott Sumner, and he just didn't want to be talked to. He didn't think that he was an interesting enough person to talk about.
He's like, why do you want to talk to me? For what?
Yeah. But yeah, that's always kind of our half-assed, not dream, but like, hey, this guy is out there. No one ever hears from him, but.
Yeah, just the interest in the
well,
stories.
because I was talking to actually it was another guy that I knew from the disc era, but he's got a studio out in north of town, and he wanted me to come out and like hook up a bunch of shit for him. And he used to be tight with Scott, and so I'm like, so what's the deal? Because I've talked to people that have worked with Scott, like Randy and Alan Lynch. He was kind of like partners with him in his studio, and I've talked to them about it, and it was just they just ended up closing down the studio, and then he didn't want to move it to his house because I guess his wife's like, oh hell no, you're not having all those weirdos traipse through. So he just got like a job. He's working it for Leonard Syrups, you know, right. slanging soda syrup. So, you know, but
I mean, we all work with someone who's like in a band or whatever, and that's just his background.
I don't know. It's just where you just like, okay, well, you know, I've been doing this for so long that, you know, I don't envision ever being like, well, I'm just going to hang it up and not do this.
It's a whole different lifestyle, I imagine, once you step out of it.
Yeah. And it's not like it's like some super cool party lifestyle. It's just that it's, you know, it's funny because it was like I was at a funeral over the weekend, and the guy that was there, he did drafting, and he was like, I'm 75 years old, and he's still like, I enjoy it. I got to come up with shit in my head and like lay it out on paper. It's great. Why wouldn't I want to do that? It's something I enjoy doing. It's the same thing. I enjoy what I do. So.
Well, we enjoy what you do too.
So keep Scott Sumner, he must be getting fat paid with a syrup deal. So, you know.
Well, from what we heard, he did not get fat paid from a certain record label that put out Most Tasteless. So he's still waiting on that check.
There's allegedly a lot.
Yeah, that's just from a text that someone sent us that he may or may not have said. We're not disparaging anyone. We're just passing along the innuendo that he may or may not have gotten paid for that. That's okay. So, I mean, I know you've talked about it ad nauseum at other podcasts, and you touched on it here that you saw Twisted coming into the studio. You just hooked up with them naturally based on what I've gathered. You recognizing their hard work and talent, and them doing the same for you.
They straight up came in. They're like, hey, would you want to do a project with us? And again, I knew them from seeing them around. I had never actually done sessions with them, but I was like, well, of course, and then once they told me basically the deal with Most Tasteless, how they got, sued 6 Ways from Sunday because of, using shit that they shouldn't have been doing. They're like, the main thing is that we can't, sample anybody because, we're not looking to go through all that again. So I had, I've been recording shit since forever. So I've got just tons of just guitar stuff and drum stuff. That's all just like stuff that, played and none of it's released because it was never on anything. Mm-hmm. And so we just like chopped up that stuff for sample purposes and didn't have to worry about getting sued because it was mine to begin with. So I could sue myself, I suppose, if I wanted to do that.
Yeah, that is interesting because I was thinking that I never really noticed a sample on any songs you're connected to, really, Yeah,
you're
from the era before when people were sampling like crazy.
Yeah, you're a scratch kind of guy.
It was funny because Paul, when I was working on his Chainsmoker project, he's like, I need samples for this stuff here, and he told me the stuff he wanted. So I would make songs that were just short, little itty bitty songs with like me singing and me playing everything, and I'd sample that. Just rather than try to dig and find it, I'm like, I'll just make it, and so throw that in there and people would never know any different because it sounds like it's supposed to. Yeah. That's the main thing. Does it sound cool? Okay.
Yeah, that works. It works.
And so sticking with what we've done on our podcast, our first season, we went through Most Tasteless, and that was, like we said, mostly Scott Sumner. Second season, if we jump a little ahead, we did Dark Lotus, Tales from the Lotus Pod. So
Tales from the Lotus Pod.
It is not, I know you talked Freak Show pretty thoroughly on Twisted's podcast, which was really good. It was you, and they had Arnett on it too, talking about the art. Mm-hmm. So if anyone wants to dive more into Freak Show, go listen to Twisted's podcast. I think it was episode 2, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
But we fast forward a little bit, and Tales from the Lotus Pod is a album that was 3 years in the making from Psychopath. Yeah. So many different producers, so many different eras. It was so many pieces of a puzzle that one could argue may or may not have fit together, or shouldn't have fit. Just timing and people.
Yeah, the amount of starts and stops. You said people in and out and everything going on with it.
Did you feel that like you were a square peg in a round hole, or did you feel pressure? Or
well, what the deal was okay. We did Freak Show. And then we did Mirror Mirror. And when we were doing Mirror Mirror, what I would do is I'd go, I think it was on Tuesdays, is I'd go over to the Lotus Pod on Tuesdays to work with them there. And so we'd kind of bounce between the disc and the Lotus Pod. And what ended up happening, because with Lotus originally it was supposed to be Mike Clark doing it, but then they had their big falling out with Joe. But Alex came to me at the disc and wanted me, he's like, we're starting a studio, an in-house studio. We want you to come over there. But I mean, it wasn't necessarily like a financial thing, but since I had known, and I'd worked with ICP with them coming in and doing show tapes. And I knew like from back, like Tunnel of Love, where this guy, Big Frank, worked for the school, and I knew him, and he actually brought that in. He's like, well, check this shit out. Here are these guys I'm working with. And I'm like, oh, well, that's some crazy shit. Great. So I knew of them, but I'd heard lots of stories involving over there. And it was like, okay, do I really want to go from this craziness that's here? Do I want to step up so I was like, I didn't even get back with Alex. I didn't even say yes, no, or whatever. I was just like, I kind of was stewing on that.
Did they, I'm sorry, like to interrupt, but, and I don't, we should have asked this originally. Was he asking you just to come over, or was he propositioning you to like build their studio for them? Because the lore is that was Mike P, that they brought him in to like
put together,
ground up, build that studio. Like, are you Was that in conjunction with, or do you think you were offered it first?
I timing wise, I don't even remember. I just remember when Alex came in, he was saying that they were building a studio. I'm pretty sure that they had, because the person who built the studio was the same guy that did work at the disc, a guy by the name of Jim Orzel, who ended up like hosing me on a home remodeling project. But he was tight with Scott Sumner, so he's the one who like built the studio. But with Mike P, I know that he picked out a lot of the shit, so I don't know, it might have been that he wanted me to come over and do that, but again, I don't remember if it was like, hey, come over here and we'll put the studio together, whatever you want. Gotcha. So I'd go over there when we were doing Mirror Mirror, but what had happened was I worked at the disc. I worked with Shaggy's younger brother, who was in a group called Toxic.
Yes, Mike 3, Tom and Tom. Tom, Mike, and Mike, yes.
Joe found out that they were like using ICP's name to kind of like get over, and then I wasn't allowed to go to the Lotus pod anymore because I worked with them, even though I didn't have an option of who I was working with. So when we were doing the stuff we did for Tales for the Lotus pod, we had to do that at the disc and then send that over to Mike P at the Lotus pod because I wasn't allowed to go over there anymore. And that's when that happened. It was One Less G, same thing, where I'd do that at the disc, but then they'd have to ship that over. And I think there was ABK stuff over there too. So, and then that's how that stuff is like. Mike P would take and replay all my guitar parts for Dark Lotus and for Blaze, strip me out, put his stuff in. The only guitar part that stayed on any of that is that actual melody line for Juggalo Family, is me playing guitar. For some reason, he didn't take that out because I don't think
he
could get the right sound for it.
Fucking most iconic song, if not in their history.
Yeah, is that the opening noise that you hear? That doon, that's the
there's
the guitar.
Yeah, I love it.
Here we go. Look at that.
It's this right here. So I've still got somewhere. I've got a CD with the original version on it, with the original guitars. I know I've got the original version of Given Half a Chance by Blaze before Mike P changed that the way he did. I've got the OG version of that with me, with all my guitars and the way that originally was. So
interesting.
He'd go and kind of strip me out and put himself in there, and however, wherever, whyever, it all ends up working in the end. But I just think it's a trip because it was like everything came out of Juggalo Family except the actual melody part. So, and
that CD is weird because there's no credits, there's no nothing. It's just a blank.
And that's the thing is like I was trying to tell people, it's like, well, here's the songs that I did on it, and they're like, well, that's bullshit. And I'm like, well,
fuck
you don't really know because there aren't any credits on it. So how is anybody to know other than
Yeah.
This is kind of what's started our discussion of we need to talk to you, because we did Lotus and we're like piecing together. We're like, we know these are like the 4 or 5 that Fritz and Twisted brought, but like what was he working on? And then now we're diving into Tales in our next season, and again the credits are a jumbled mess, and we know like you started a majority or all of that and it was changed up. So that's kind of where like we need to get to the bottom of how this actually was pieced together, because it's both of them are convoluted.
It was like again, it was supposed to be Mike Clark, but then it's not Mike Clark, so then it's Mike P. But then me and Twisted are sending stuff over there. So I wasn't allowed to be there, so I wasn't privy to what was going on. So. And and then after a while, after I was done with my time out of working with somebody that I had no option of working with, then I was allowed to come over there again. So, and then Alex swooped me out of the disc. And then the first thing I did when I went over there, the very first thing I did was jump steady. That was.
So the chaos theory, is that what it would have been?
That was the first one? Yeah, chaos theory. Did we have anything else for Lotus? Do you know? I mean, I don't know how even we pieced it together. We have you credited for 3 songs. Give Me That Blood, Headache, and Juggalo Family. Do you think those are the only 3, or?
That sounds like it. I think that might be. I think there were only 3 that we did.
And we always, if I asked an artist, I always want to know in a super group like that, how hard is it for 6 different voices to have a cohesive voice, which if you listen to that CD front to back,
sometimes it's not.
They're kind of not there. But now we're talking, there's 3 different producers on it too. Like, not that CD isn't great or has like a place in Juggalo history, but there's just so many pieces, like so many cooks in the kitchen, that how did that pie come out when there was
Well, I don't know on that one, but I can definitely speak for Black Rain, because that I'm very, very familiar with that, because that was a whole other level of just nuts.
We may have to pencil that in for a future season and have Fritz episode volume 2 in the future. Do we have anything else? Lotus Pod that or Tales from the Lotus Pod?
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
So you alluded to it. So laying on top of this, now this season we're doing One Less G in the Hood, Blaze's first LP. Right around the same time. Did we talk about, I don't know if we talked about, did you, stepping half a step back, did you work with him on his EP? Because we feel like that got done and brought to the record label.
Album.
Yes, we did that. That was basically the same time that we were doing Freak Show.
Okay.
So that was almost
they came out
the same time we were kind of doing that. Because I mean, Blaze would be in the studio when we were working on that anyhow, because they'd have just the same gang of people that would come hang out. So he was always around. But yeah, that was a lot of me on there too, and a lot of. And same thing with like Paul and Jamie. It was the whole Sister Cirrhosis Sound Squad.
Yeah.
Piecing it together. When we were pacing shit together. That's what we called it. But so that was all done at the disc. That was all, most of my production, and it was that's a dope one. I liked that one.
Oh yeah, that's an all timer.
Thugging and mashing and. There was, if he was going to do it anywhere, it had to be done at the disc.
That screams Detroit hip hop.
That
one. Yeah,
you're trying to be a grimy local rapper, like that's the sound. Yeah. That's
and he's dead to boot. So
Did you? I mean, obviously by that time, I'd say you were working closely with, friendly with everyone. Did you feel pressure to make Blaze's CD as awesome as possible to get him a spot on the roster? Was this hey, this is my tryout for Psychopathic? I'm sure he felt the pressure. Do you feel that same pressure, or is it just another day in the office?
It's always the way that I look at it is everything that I work on becomes my favorite project at the time, because you got to approach it with, if you're just like, whatever, it's just making another Big Mac, then it doesn't, you try to just make it the best that you can. So whatever the intention was behind it, I wasn't even privy to any of that, because it didn't matter. It didn't matter if he was just going to be like, I'm just making a bump tape, that I'm going to, press CDs for my family.
Right.
It's making it as cool as possible, and that if he used that as like the angle to get in there, I mean, that's cool too. Yeah. So
I guess I should have asked that same question back with Lotus, but I guess we can tie all this together. How long did it take until you realized the scope of the Juggalo world? Like Dark Lotus, like we said, it was a CD that was 3-4 years in the making, and people
the hype on it
went crazy for it. Like, did you? How long did it take until you realized how big and rabid of a fan base this was, and even like pressure with that? Like, maybe that's better that you didn't have the pressure of like, man, people have been waiting for the CD for 3 years. Like, it was just, you were still doing your best, but you didn't like realize.
Right. Cause I mean, a lot of the time it's just like when we got done with Freak Show, it took me probably a year before I listened to it again, because we had gone over it so many times that it was like, it's cool, but I'm done with it. I gotta, put that on pause for a second. So, cause we spent so much time on it, but I think it was when, I went to Hollow Wicked the year that came out.
That's 2000. I think that was in another.
Yeah. And so to be there for that, then you start to get a feel for it. And then really when I would first started going to gatherings in 2002 was where you can really kind of see the scale of that and just what people are, people are into it. So
that's like when the snowball started rolling. So you kind of jumped in right when it's, it has a little bit of momentum and it's just rolling down the hill when you got in there.
Yeah. Cause that's what, I mean, I remember like being there at like Nelson Ledges with just like, with Lotus doing Juggalo Family and just seeing just this sea of people there, like all just, catching the Holy Ghost, Lotus. And it's like,
it's that guitar rip.
It is.
That's me playing that. That's pretty cool,
Right.
So, and that was, I felt that this year last year at Fright Fest too, where people were, and then actually one of the people I was with, the girl was like, do you like it when people are into your music? I'm like, that's the whole reason why I do it, And the best part is since nobody knows who I am, it's like, I can just like be standing there and not have to worry about people, bugging me. I'm just like checking it out.
You probably knocked Fritz over trying to get to the bar.
I don't know what you're talking about. I got excited. It was a fun show.
Stumbling over to that sidebar. So I'm sorry. Back to One Less G, which is what we're talking about. You have production credits for playing on Maggot Face, Here I Am, Hood Rats, Saturday Afternoon, Given Half the Chance, and Thug for Life. That's almost half the CD. Mm-hmm. Do you have any?
And again, with that stuff we did at the disc and then sent it over to the Lotus Pod for, because they just the way that they would do things were then, if Jay was working on one of the Clowns projects, then, Mike P would be doing that. But then if he had obviously he had time open away from the Clowns, that they were like, okay, well you're doing this Blaze project because either I was doing something with Twisted or whatever it was. But I know that we did that stuff at the disc and then sent it over there. Cause again, I've got the original version of Given Half a Chance. That's my original version of it, before it got changed to the way it is.
Yeah,
on
we'll have to we'll dissect that when we get to that in a couple of weeks. So,
and I think Blaze mentioned it in a previous interview that when he did his verses, he heard just your original beats. He went on tour and came back, and all that stuff, like you said, was layered or changed or added on. So it's kind of interesting that he heard basically a different album than when he came back from tour.
And I mean, and that again, that might have been it. That'd be crazy if they just like took it and had him record all his parts and then just decided, okay, we're gonna go change all this shit, and then here.
It does seem like, even with the skit at the end, it does seem like they sent him out on tour with 4 or 5 songs. And God, did we read or hear that somewhere where he laid down all of his vocals, went on tour, and then got worked on at the studio kind of without him.
So he was back, and I mean, again, I wasn't allowed to.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And that was a time, I mean, you alluded to it. They had so many projects going on at the same time, just back to back to back. Within a year and a half, 2 years, you're talking Freak Show, Mirror Mirror, Lotus, Jay's EP, leading into the sixth, like so
ABK,
much.
Right. You know, bringing ABK, and then, you know, in 2002, you get Esham in the mix too. Right. So it's just, there's.
And that adds to the Lotus lore, because everyone's like, well, was that a Lotus song? Like, you know, something on Freak Show or something on Blaze. Was that recorded for Lotus and saved for this, or, you know, recycled for this? So that's become like this whole lore in the Juggalo world of people just dissecting which songs were in what sessions and where.
Yeah, and when they were recorded, because God forbid anything with 3 people on it's like, oh, that's got to be a Lotus song, but they saved it for something else, and it's like,
well, yeah, because it says given half a chance, performed by Dark Lotus.
Even like what is it? It seems like there's one on every CD in that era. That's just everyone thinks it's Lotus.
The one that Shaggy produced off a Freak Show, where I'm a maniac killer.
Oh yeah.
That's got everybody on it, so that must be
way back.
But but that's still in that general area, because I was from the second one, right?
Yeah.
So
right, but
there's just so much going on at that time.
It would have been Lotus if it had the original Mars on it, but it
Here we go. Now we're talking. Did you have anything else, One Less G related? I mean, we just started talking about the CD, so we're not that deep into it. We were just.
Yeah, I guess curious on just, those are the songs that you credited for, but did you basically start with all of it? Like, were your hands on the beginning of all the tracks, or do you remember anything like that?
No, generally it's you just start making beats for it, and then you just start slinging them to people. Mm-hmm. And then, if they record to them, cool. If they don't, whatever's whatever. It's just you constantly feed them. It's constantly just working on stuff. And then once you get enough, then you're like, okay, well, this is almost an album. Then what are we going to, add some more stuff to it to make it an actual album? But it's, again, we'd just be working on stuff for Blaze, and then knowing that, he's going to use it for something eventually.
Right.
And then we just send it, okay, here you go, Chris, take it over, take it over there. And especially if they have him record all his vocals and then send him on tour and then put the album together.
Working that horse. Get him out there.
He's a dead body. He doesn't need
sleep.
So it looks like the only one that I actually have just a sole credit on is Thug for Life.
And Blaze referenced that, saying that was from an old R&B group you recorded the disc?
It was originally made to kind of shop to an R&B group or somebody that wanted to do R&B that just didn't ended up, using it. But yeah, that was because I used to do like a ton of R&B stuff there. So I was trying to get into doing production for that. Yeah. But then, that's a tough thing to get into. I played a lot of bass for R&B stuff, but never any production for it. But I tried, but it came out on a Blaze album.
Yeah. We enjoyed it, so lucky for us, it landed there.
As long as somebody enjoys it, it doesn't matter if it's, So.
You got anything else?
No, that was, like I said, kind of getting little bits and pieces as we dive into Blaze here. You want to hear from you first, I thought would be a good starting point.
Yeah, definitely. Starting off with Blaze's career here on Psychopathic and going forward to Magic Ninja. Thought it'd be a good spot to start with. The man behind the beats. I don't know. We don't have much else because we've kind of covered all of our seasons here. And we know that you've obviously stuck with Twisted and Blaze throughout the years, still working with them. We see your name all the time on almost every project, and we suspect we will continue seeing and hearing you.
Yeah, and that's, and that's what I will continue to do.
Excellent.
Provide that service to the underground. So,
do you make it out to Astronomicon every year?
Yeah, I do.
All right. Well, we'll have
I
to.
do. Last year, I smoked a brisket and pulled pork and brought that up there.
What the hell?
Come on by to the 20 by 20 table. That's where we'll be at. So bring that brisket right over to us.
Yeah.
But again, because it's cool because nobody knows who I am. So I just go there and wander around. There might be every now and then I'll get somebody who's like, hey, can I get a picture with you? Some people know, but the vast majority of people, because I'm just not out there like that. So it's cool. I just go undercover.
You don't have a gimmick, that's what it is. You need a little gimmick behind you.
Yeah.
It's the cat. You got to accentuate the cat.
He doesn't have a gimmick. His name is Fritz the Cat. It's a gimmick in itself. I always knew the name as a cartoon, but I just started looking into the cartoon and it's wild.
Here's the deal. Here's how that whole thing came about. Is that every place that I worked as a young man, like whoever was my supervisor, whoever was above me, went to college in the 70s. And so immediately when they hear the name Fritz, that's the first thing they thought of was that, hey, Fritz the Cat. So they would put my name on the schedule as Fritz the Cat. And again, I knew of the movie, but it wasn't like it was my thing or anything.
Right.
And then the one studio I first started out with working, the guy actually booked airplane tickets. Fritz the Cat. I've still got the boarding pass. And I'm like, what happens if something happens and I got to show ID? Yeah. And he just thought it was hilarious. Same thing. Hotel room, Fritz the Cat. I'm like, I'm going to Vegas. What the hell's going to happen if I need to show an ID for anything? And he didn't care. So it was like when people were like, well, how do you want credit on the album? I'm like, well, fuck it. If people been calling me Fritz the Cat forever, then guess what? I'm going to run with it. So there.
Nice.
You've been calling me Fritz the Cat forever, so whatever. I guess I'm Fritz.
I remember when we first seen it on the booklets and the credits are like, who's this guy? What is his name?
Yeah. Well, now we know the backstory. Yeah. Now we got to watch the movie.
Right. Watch along, maybe.
Seems wild.
It's counterculture.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's all we got.
Unless you have any plug skis you want to put in there.
Yeah. Parting words, websites, where people can find you.
At FTC Music Labs for Instagram and Facebook. I'm usually busy and can't really, whatever projects I'm working on, it's hard to put out there because they usually have to keep it under wraps until we're actually ready to release them. So I can just basically put random musical things out, non-project specific. But I've got beats on my BeatStar page. I got I do mixing, mastering, whatever. Just send me a message either through Facebook or Instagram.
Does Magic Ninja still have their Beats page for sale?
No, they didn't. But the stuff that I had up there, I moved to my BeatStars page.
Gotcha.
So they took that down because they couldn't push it the way that it needed to be pushed. So that was just one too many things to have to worry about.
I gotcha. No, we're friends with Jesse, Stir Crazy, and I always see him pushing his beats every 10 minutes on Facebook. Yeah. he pumps them out. Talking about working 24 hours a day. That kid's nonstop. So
right.
Yeah, no, there's beats out there, but if you want them, if you need them, go see our man Fritz. Maybe see Jesse. I don't know.
Get that sick guitar lick down.
Yeah. Bust out that guitar. Let's hear it. All right. We appreciate your time, Fritz. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir.
And there you have it. That's our interview with Fritz the Cat. Thanks to Fritz and everyone over at Magic Ninja Entertainment for allowing us to have this open conversation with the producer of some of your favorite Juggalo albums. You can follow Fritz on all social medias. We'll have all of his handles in our show notes. Don't forget, you can follow us everywhere. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Juggalo RWD. Come to our website, juggalorewind.com. We also want you to give us a call. Give us a text message, 810 666-1570 or drop us an email at juggalorwd@gmail.com. Don't forget to like, rate, review, subscribe anywhere you are listening or watching this video. That's it for this week. Next week, we'll be right back on track with your regularly scheduled Season 4. So until then, this is Peter from the Juggalo Rewind. See you next week. All music played in this episode and in this entire season is owned by the respective publishers and copyright holders and is reproduced for review purposes only under fair use.
So I died, now I'm back in a blast in a mile.